Inside Lichfield Cathedral, you're surrounded by centuries of old stone, stained glass, and memorials that go back to a time long before your granddad was born. But even with all that history around you, there's still one sculpture that seems to stop people in a completely different way. It's not there to show off power, wealth, or status. It shows two young girls asleep in each other's arms, carved in pale marble, peaceful and still. This is the monument known as the Sleeping Children. The sculpture was created by Sir Francis Chantrey, one of the most respected British sculptors of the early 19th century, and it was made in memory of two sisters, Ellen Jane and Marianne Robinson. When you first see it, it almost looks gentle, as though the girls have simply drifted off to sleep together. But once you know the story behind it, the whole thing feels much heavier, because this was not just a beautiful piece of art, it was a mother's grief shaped into marble. The girls were the daughters of Reverend William Robinson and his wife Ellen Jane, and the family already had strong links with Lichfield through the cathedral. William Robinson had served as a prebendary there, so this was not just a random family placing a memorial in a random building. Their name already belonged to the place in some way, but by the time Chantrey came to carve the Sleeping Children, the Robinson family had already been hit by the sort of loss that's hard to properly take in. Reverend William Robinson died in 1812, leaving his wife Ellen Jane as a widow with their two daughters. Now the following year, in 1813, tragedy struck again when the older daughter, also called Ellen Jane, where she died after a nightdress caught fire while she was prepping for bed in Bath. It was sudden, violent and awful, and that makes the calmness of the sculpture even harder to look at once you understand what happened. And then only a year later, in 1814, a younger sister, Marianne, died in London after becoming ill. So within just a few years, Ellen Jane Robinson had lost her husband and both of her children. That's the pain sitting beyond this monument. It's not just a memorial to two little girls. It's the visible remains of a family that had been almost completely broken apart. After the deaths of her daughters, the mother commissioned Chantrey to create a memorial for them. And the way the children are shown was not chosen by accident. The story goes that Ellen Jane remembered seeing her daughters asleep together, lying in each other's arms, and that memory became the heart of the sculpture. That's why they're not shown in fear, suffering or death. They're shown as the mother wanted to remember them, quiet and close as if nothing in the world could disturb them. The Sleeping Children also stands as a monument to infant and child loss. At the time this was made, the loss of children was far more common than it is today, but that didn't make it any less devastating for the families who lived through it. What makes this memorial so powerful is that it does not reduce those children to names, dates, or a carved inscription. It gives them presence and lets them remain as children, close together, peaceful and loved. And for anyone who's ever lost a child or even tried to imagine that kind of loss, there's something painfully recognisable in the way the mother chose to remember them. The sculpture was made in 1816, shown at the Royal Academy in London in 1817, and later placed here in Lichfield Cathedral. When it was first exhibited, it became incredibly well known because people were deeply moved by it. Memorials from this period could sometimes feel formal and distant, full of religious symbols and carefully worded inscriptions. But the Sleeping Children feels much more direct than that. You don't need to know anything about the sculpture to understand it. You only have to look at it for a few moments to feel what it's trying to say. One of the most delicate details is the snowdrops held by the younger child. Snowdrops are often linked with innocence, hope and the fragile beginning of life. But here they seem to carry something even more painful, because these children were taken before their lives had really begun. It's only a small detail, but once you notice it, it changes the way you look at the whole monument. They're being remembered as innocent, fragile and gone far too soon. There's also a local connection outside the cathedral that makes the story feel even more rooted in Lichfield. On Boar Street stands Donegal House, a grand 18th century building that was built in 1713 for James Robinson, a wealthy Lichfield merchant. James Robinson was part of the same Robinson family line, and through him the family name was already written into the city before the tragedy of the two girls ever happened. Now don't take this as gospel, as I've not had the time to find proof that Ellen Jane and Marianne themselves lived at Donegal House, so I can't say that as fact. But Donegal House does connect us to the wider Robinson family, and that makes the Sleeping Children feel less like an isolated monument and more like part of Lichfield's own story. Their family had roots here, and the name was connected with one of the city's notable houses, and the final memorial ended up inside the cathedral. That's what makes this sculpture so powerful. It's not just the skill of Chantrey, It's the way the whole thing sits between public history and private grief. Over the last 200 years, thousands of people have stood in front of it, but the story at the centre of it's still painfully personal. A mother lost her husband and then lost one daughter in a terrible accident, and then soon lost the other to a disease. In the middle of all that grief, she chose to remember him, not in the moment of death, but in a moment of peace. And maybe that's why the Sleeping Children still holds people today. It don't need a dramatic legend around it, and it don't need to shout for attention. You can walk into Lichfield Cathedral with all that history towering above you. But this quiet little scene of two sisters asleep together still managed to hold its own. Not because it's loud, but because it feels real. In the end, the Sleeping Children's one of those pieces of local history where the facts are simple, but the feeling behind them's enormous. Two sisters, Ellen Jane and Marianne Robinson, died within a year of each other. Their mother, already widowed, commissioned one of the finest sculptors of the age to preserve them in a way she remembered them best. And more than 2 centuries later, they're still there inside Lichfield Cathedral, lying side by side in marble, remembered not for how they died, but for how deeply they were loved. So rest in peace, Ellen Jane and Marianne Robinson.